Welcome everyone. I understand that we have started the live event. My name is Barbara Warwas. I'm a lecturer in multi-level regulation at the Hague University of Applied Sciences. And together with Hanna Falkiewicz, who is a law student at the Hague University, we will be moderating the event. Let me first start with a short introduction to the current events in Poland and abroad, and then I move on to the introduction of our speakers and the format of the event. On 22nd of October 2020, the Polish Constitutional Tribunal decided that abortion in case of severe fetal defects is unconstitutional. This ruling distorted the so-called abortion compromise existent in Poland for around 27 years now, based on the law on family planning of 1993. According to this law, abortion was legal only in 3 cases in Poland. First, if the pregnancy was a result of criminal act, such as rape or incest. Second, when the woman's life or health was at risk. And third, if the fetus was irreparably damaged. So, why was the judgment issued? In 2016, there was a citizen initiative that was launched by anti-abortion movement that proposed a bill that was discussed in the parliament. This triggered already then a wave of protests of Polish women and other participants, which was called the Black Protest, and it forced the parliament to abandon the project. The anti-abortion movement, unfortunately, didn't give up. In 2019, 119 members of the parliament representing PiS, which is the governing party in Poland, and 2 other right-wing parties referred a question to the Constitutional Tribunal whether or not abortions of pregnancies unrelated to rape or not threatening the mother's life are constitutional. As we already know, the Polish Constitutional Tribunal responded negatively. Because around 98% of all pregnancy terminations in Poland are a result of the severe fetal defects, with this judgment, the Constitutional Tribunal almost completely banned abortion in Poland. Women again reacted by joining protests in Poland and around the world, which triggered further political, social, and legal developments. Today, we want to discuss those developments with our experts and give students and other participants an opportunity to ask questions. So let me now welcome and introduce our speakers. And I would already like to stress to the viewers that we have some technical problems. So one of our speakers is on the phone and 2 of them are trying to connect, and hopefully they will be with us soon. We do not yet have with us Marta Achler. She is a senior legal advisor at the European Center for Not-for-Profit Law and a lawyer in the field of international law and international human rights law. Hopefully Marta will join us later. We have Pola Cebulak, which I will try to put on the screen now. Pola is assistant professor in European law at University of Amsterdam. We have Ewa Hofmańska, who is a PhD lawyer and academic and legal expert at the Trust Fund for Victims at the International Criminal Court. She's with us on the phone, so unfortunately we cannot see her, but she will be participating in our discussion. We do have present Agnieszka Bieńka-Cała, who is a professor in constitutional law at Nicolaus Copernicus University in Toruń, Poland. And we are still waiting to connect with Ms. Eliza Rutynowska, who is a lawyer at the Civil Development Forum and trainee attorney at the Warsaw Bar Association. So hopefully we can get in contact with Marta and Eliza very soon. If not, we will have them for another discussion in the future. So what is the purpose and format of the event today? We really want to have a discussion with experts on what is happening in Poland and internationally for students and participants. Our discussion will be mostly on the legal aspects of the current developments, because we mostly have lawyers and academic lawyers with us. It will be organized in 3 main themes. First, we will start with the judgment itself. Second, we would like to discuss the protests. And third, we want to discuss women's rights in comparative context. Our 2 experts who are to discuss protests are not with us, so this program may be subject to change. And we will end with a brief discussion on what will or should happen next, and what we as academic students, other participants can do in response to the current events. So I will moderate the discussion. I will ask our experts a few questions, and these questions will be just conversation starters. So feel free to answer them and answer also other questions. And this will be followed by 10 minutes Q&A moderated by Hannah. How you can get involved in Q&A. You as participants, you can write down your questions in our live chat, and then Hannah will be publishing them and bringing them up to the panel. So we will have 2 or 3 teams, depending on technical possibilities. And then we will have 15 minutes of the discussion and 10 minutes of Q&A. I think we are ready to start with our first panel. So we have Agnieszka Bieńka-Cała and we have Ewa Hofmańska on the phone. And I would like to start with the first question to Ewa.
Yes, I'm ready. Hello.
Yes, good morning. Good afternoon, Eva. So let me first ask you the question about the legitimacy of the current Constitutional Tribunal. So the judgment was rendered by the Constitutional Tribunal that since 2015, when peace got into power, has largely become a political organ of peace. So my question to you is twofold. What is the role of Constitutional Tribunal in Poland? And is the current tribunal a legitimate organ?
Yes, so I would say in a democratic state governed by the rule of law, there is a division of powers. The Constitution clearly states that the judicial authority is separate and independent from the other authorities, which are legislative and executive powers. According to Polish Constitution, the judicial power is exercised by the courts, including the Constitutional Court. The role of the Constitutional Court is provided for in the Polish Constitution. According to it, the court rules, among others, on compliance of parliamentary acts and international treaties with the Constitution. So, generally speaking, the Constitutional Court's primary task is the judicial control of the constitutionality of law. In light of the Constitution, we can say that the Constitutional Court is a separate constitutional body independent from other courts. Its system, functioning, the way it is appointed, and the legal status of its judgments make it completely independent of other judicial authorities, such as the Supreme Court or the Supreme Administrative Court. What is important, the Constitutional Court adjudicates abstractly, which means that it is not possible for the court to rule on an individual case, like, for example, in Germany. So, regarding to the second part of your question, which is the current Constitutional Court's legitimate organ, I can say that the current Constitutional Court is not composed properly. Lawyers call it a quasi-court because the court is currently ruling in an unconstitutional composition. There are 2 reasons for this, in my opinion. Mr. Duda, the president of Poland, refused to appoint to the judicial office the judges who had been properly elected in the previous term of the parliament and appointed the incorrectly elected persons in their place. Moreover, persons elected do not meet requirements provided for by law. For me, as well as for many other lawyers, it is obviously the aim of these efforts was to fill the Constitutional Court by persons dependent on the ruling party, which is law and justice. So I only remind that the destruction of the Constitutional Court started in 2015, soon after Law and Justice won the parliamentary election in October. It was then that Polish people took to the streets for the first time to protest against the law and justice method of exercising power in Poland. Today, there is only one judge of the Constitutional Court, elected not by law and justice in 2012. So, in light of the Constitution, the Constitutional Court is composed of 15 judges, elected individually by the same, which is the lower house of the parliament, for 9 years from among those with outstanding legal knowledge. Successive appointment to the court of people from the same political party with formed views has resulted in the court losing its independence. It has become a convenient tool in the hands of the ruling political party in Poland. The result is that the court, so formed, decides on the constitutionality of the law created by Law and Justice and states that the provisions of law with which the ruling party doesn't agree on the viewpoint are inconsistent with the Constitution. It was needed for the ruling party because it didn't achieve the constitutional majority in the parliament. So the logic of this populistic party is as follows. If you are not able to change the constitution, you need the dependent constitutional court in order to introduce unconstitutional reforms. It is therefore no wonder that lawyers, and not only they, are questioning the legitimacy of the current composition of the court to give independent judgments. Lawyers call the current Constitutional Court sometimes the court of Mrs. Przyłębska, who is the president of this court, underline at the same time that it is not the Constitutional Court within the meaning of the Constitution. Another time, lawyers call judgments of this court pseudo-judgments to stress that all documents issued by this court are not real judgments within the meaning of law, as the court which delivers it is not a real constitutional court within the meaning of the Polish Constitution. I think that there is also one more question which we should ask. Why was it the Constitutional Court, not Parliament, who decided on legality of abortion? And I would say this case was the subject of consideration by the Constitutional Court because such a motion was submitted to examine the conformity with the Constitution of the provisions of the Act of 1993 on family planning, protection of the human fetus, and conditions of admissibility of termination of pregnancy. So, in theory, the Parliament could have changed this act because Law and Justice is the ruling political party which has regular majority in the Parliament. I think that the Law and Justice didn't do that, as in this case there was a risk that the potential revision would not be accepted even by the members of its party. Changing the Act on Family Planning by the Parliament would be legally more correct solution because the Constitution doesn't deal with the legality of abortion. For example, according to Article 38 of the Constitution,
Eva, excuse me, I would need to interrupt you because we got there was some small technical issue, but I would also like to interrupt you already a little bit at this stage and summarize maybe on the first question about the legitimacy of the Polish Constitutional Tribunal, and so that we can maybe understand step by step what are the legal problems also when it comes to formal questions with the judgment. Yes. So before we go into the actual judgment and what it states and what rights are potentially violated there, or what is the judgment itself, I would like to also ask a question to Agnieszka, if she would like to add anything to this discussion about the current status of the Constitutional Tribunal and how is the current judgment treated by Polish state organs. So Eva, I'm now addressing this question to Agnieszka.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Well, this is this perspective that was drawn a few minutes ago is obviously this perspective of liberal constitutionalism, and in this meaning, we should agree with the problem with the legitimacy of the Constitutional Court and how the system looked like. But in my opinion, we have also the possibility to build a new type of constitutionalism, illiberal constitutionalism, and after that, if we agree that such kind of constitutionalism could be theorized, then we will see something more. Because this is not only breaching the constitution, what do Constitutional Court or does Constitutional Court or other organs of Polish state like parliament or government, but this has its own logic. So in my opinion, we can say that the judgment of Constitutional Court was decided because of this shifted role of the Constitutional Court in or within the illiberal constitutionalism. Now we see how the Constitutional Court is used as an enabler, I would say, of parliament or of government. The Constitutional Tribunal in this meaning seems to be servant of political will. So it is activated when it is in line of political demand of government or parliament, or frankly speaking, not those organs, but obviously Jarosław Kaczyński, who is now he is a member of government, but previously he was only the president of the leading party, and sometimes he was described as informal authority. And this is true, that whole system was adjusted to his demands. So we can say that that we can observe a division of attitudes toward the Constitutional Court. For the governing majority, this is a legitimate court which assesses situation in accordance with the Constitution, binding Constitution. And for the opposition and those who follows this liberal constitutionalism, because I am also liberal constitutionalist, we can say that this is not legitimate, but the function from this illiberal constitutionalism is known. Yes, so we will see that the Constitutional Court is used in purpose, yes, to enable this political demand of the government, parliament, and Jarosław Kaczyński.
Okay, Agnieszka, if I may jump in here.
Yeah.
So something about the facts. So that's very important also for us to know in the context of theories, but we would also like to maybe understand what is currently happening with this judgment. Yeah. Because we mentioned that quite a few people, especially opposition and lawyers, academics, contest the legitimacy of the current tribunal. But what does it mean for the judgment itself?
In my opinion, the judgment is binding. Yes, it is judgment because we don't have, in Constitution, we don't have any procedure to deal with the judgments of Constitutional Court. It is binding because it cannot be changed by Constitutional Court or other courts. Yes, and we are waiting for publication. And since the publication, the judgment will affect the legal order. So the legal provisions that were questions, they won't have this legal force. Yes, after publication, but the judgment is not has been not published yet. And we don't know, frankly, if it will be published. Yes, this is also the sign of the illiberalization of the system.
So just to add to this, maybe for our participants, all law in Poland or judgments all law basically, because of course we are a civil law system, needs to be published through the official journal of laws. And the same refers to the judgments of the Constitutional Tribunal. So until that moment, we probably cannot say that the judgment will be is officially published. So what Agnieszka is referring to, she's mentioning that of course the judgment is there. I don't think there is any justification yet. However, the judgment is there, but it's not yet published through these official channels. And could you tell us also a little bit more about this, because this is part of the political discussions now?
Yeah, the political discussion is obviously it is connected with this legitimacy of the Constitutional Court and this how to describe it. This irregularities in the composition of Constitutional Court. So this element is seen also as affecting the binding force or the legal force of the judgment. And yes, this is a difficult question because, as I said, if we consider Constitution as a binding legal act, we cannot deny its consequences. Yes. So, in my opinion, as I said, this is a binding, but the effects of this judgment are not yet an element of the legal order because it is not published. But we know that in accordance to Constitutional Tribunal, the law is not conform with the Constitution.
Thank you very much. So what is the, maybe just to also briefly summarize, and this can be also a question to Eva or Agnieszka, whatever you feel is best. Very interesting to understand what are the current steps of other political organs. What is now happening with this judgment and what is happening around this judgment? So Agnieszka or Eva, who would like to tell us more about it?
Well, I can maybe start because I have to say that just regarding to what Agnieszka said just before about binding this judgment, I have to say that I can see two possible theses of this matter. Because first one, and I think that lots of people, not only lawyers, think the same, that this judgment cannot be binding because the judges of the Constitutional Court are not elected in accordance with any provisions. So as a result, all documents which persons sitting in issue are not judgments within the meaning of the law, but only their statements, as they are not judges. Of course, we know that this approach, although legally justifiable, leads to legal chaos. So another point, what Agnieszka said, is constantly presented also by the officials of the ruling party and is based on the legitimacy of the current composition of the court to give judgments. And this approach allows to consider whether or not the court's judgment of 22nd October is binding. If we follow this logic, we would have to say that this judgment is not yet in force as it has not yet been published, as Agnieszka said. But regarding to your question, what are the current legal options solving the conflict? So, in my opinion, there is no good solution at the current stage. Of course, based on the conviction that a quasi-court judgment doesn't exist in a legal sense, there is no need to do anything. The problem is that the state authorities will take the judgment seriously. And as a result, doctors will stop carrying out prohibited treatments because of the threat of criminal responsibility. And women will simply be afraid to get pregnant. So for lawyers, there are, in my opinion, two legal options to resolve the problem. First one is to determine that the quasi-judgment doesn't exist based on the lack of legal legitimacy of the current constitutional court. This option is completely unrealistic, of course, because this would mean that the ruling party have to mean calling into question the whole process of change consistently demolishing Poland from 2015. And this process has been based from the outset on unconstitutional solutions legitimized by a politically dependent quasi-constitutional court. But another solution could be a revision of the constitution. The judgment would be out of date if the pattern was changed through the prism of which the constitutionality of the Family Planning Act was examined. This solution is equally unrealistic because the ruling party has no majority in the parliament that is required to amend the constitution. Law and Justice has majority in the parliament to change a law, but not the constitution. So, in addition, it would have to be a change that clearly defines the conditions under which abortion is acceptable, which is unacceptable to conservatives. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Eva and Agnieszka. So I would like to just summarize that this problem and this judgment, the problem with this judgment, of course, has many different layers. Of course, there is a formal question of whether this judgment can be officially binding or not, and it's disputable from what you both discussed. And the second question, of course, refers to what, in fact, this judgment means for Polish women and women's rights. And I think this is also an important thing because and I would just like to stress that now our president, Duda, he proposed his own bill that would be another compromise, but this bill is also paused or put on hold in the parliament due to the current protests. And the bill basically comes very close to the original abortion compromise. So it allows three situations in which abortion will be permitted, but there is no political consensus for that either. So the question is quite political at the moment, and the parliament is decided to suspend its operation for the next 2 weeks. So the situation is quite dynamic. And of course, as we can see, and as I would like to summarize before the Q&A, the question has many layers and it goes deeply into the crisis of the Polish Constitutional Tribunal, and which started with coming into power of the current party. So I would like now to thank you very much for these initial comments, Agnieszka and Eva. Eva, I will still have you on the phone because now I would like to, Hannah to moderate the chat and address maybe some other questions to the two of you and other panelists. So Hannah, the floor is yours.
Unfortunately, I don't see any questions yet, so please go ahead if you want to know something more or if anything is not clear yet. And yeah, I will wait a second maybe for the questions.
Yes,
may I add something?
Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, as you said, it is a really difficult situation because we are not clear about what to think and how to act. Yes, to resolve this problem. We have two problems. One is with our system, with the Constitutional Tribunal existence and action competences, how it operates in the system. Because I think that yes, that the system which is occupied by the ruling party assess these elements as a binding judgments. And the Constitutional Tribunal, in this meaning, is very strong constitutional court that can influence the whole system, build whole system. And obviously, it can be questioned. And the second issue is connected with the abortion, as you said. And I feel that we don't have proper legal solutions for this problem, abortion problem, because we as Poles, as I see it, we cannot discuss, deliberate, and come up with consensus. We don't know what it is. So I feel that there is an offer from the Commissioner of Human Rights that we should open wide national debate on abortion. And I am not sure if it is enough. In my opinion, it should be like that. We should discuss this problem and to make a consensus. But I am not sure if we are able to do this under peace party rule. Yeah. So thank you. This is what I wanted to add.
Thank you very much, Agnieszka. That's absolutely interesting to hear, but I think that we are not able to do this with any governing party, frankly. It's such an especially sensitive issue in Poland as a quasi-Catholic country where the influence of church is so broad. So maybe, Eva, if you allow, I would like to now move actually to Paula, because Paula will tell us a little bit more on the woman's right to abortion in comparative perspective. So maybe you could also tell us something more, how is the abortion law in Poland now looking, and where Poland is now on the European or international map?
Yes, so thanks a lot. I'm also doing research on the role of courts and international courts. So I'm also very interested in the aspect of the role of courts in such socially divisive and like politically salient issues as abortion. But maybe here indeed I wanted to highlight a bit the perspective beyond Poland, that this is that the current wave of protests and the struggles about abortion about abortion rights or women's reproductive rights are a transnational issue. It's not something that is only specific to Poland. I mean, even the black protests were in a way inspired in terms of the use of black protests by women's protests in Iceland in 1975. So it already comes from from even the origins here. And I think like to basically maybe react on what Agnieszka just mentioned about a possibility for a bigger debate. I think here often the Irish example has been analyzed, where in Ireland is also a country with a long Catholic tradition and a Catholic majority, and Ireland had a constitutional ban on abortion, which meant that even the Irish Parliament could not pass rules legislating on abortion, because it was set out at the constitutional level that abortion was only allowed in cases of serious danger to the health of the mother. And Ireland in 2018 passed a constitutional amendment that changed this constitutional ban and allowed for legislation, for in a way regular legislation by the parliament on abortion. And this change happened first of all through a referendum, where a majority of people participating in the referendum voted for liberalizing abortion rules. And secondly, before the referendum, the proposed change was deliberated in like smaller committees that were composed of citizens representing various citizens groups. So that's also one of kind of more modern methods used for especially changing constitutions, that you have also deliberations in smaller groups to try to establish a draft, a proposal of a new law that might be acceptable to many social groups by kind of first discussing this and planning this in smaller settings. So that's something that also has been used to change the constitution of Iceland and elsewhere. So in terms of methods or tools that are used out there in the world. And obviously, I think it's also maybe the last point on the kind of comparative perspective, because we are currently kind of still waiting for the official results of the elections in the United States. I guess that is something that is often distracting many of us today. So in the United States, we also see a very strong polarization that in the elections, that like one way or another, it will be a tight election result between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And this is something that I guess it's to some extent shared with Poland in a very different context on other matters. But I do think that the consequence of such political polarization is also then that there are certain issues that will sparkle one of these groups that is close to 50% in a society. And I think that actually the abortion issue has such a potential in the United States as well. So we do already see that Donald Trump, 1 week before the election, appointed Amy Coney Barrett, a conservative judge, to the US Supreme Court, which means that basically he managed during his mandate as US president to construct a conservative majority in the US Supreme Court. And this last appointment was especially justified or kind of inspired by her views on Roe v. Wade, which is the US famous case of the US Supreme Court, which allowed for liberalization of abortion rights in the states. So this is something that might be also overturned at some point in the United States. That's not kind of that's not science fiction in terms of the current composition of the US Supreme Court. So I think that it's also likely to trigger such kind of social unrest and backlash in the society in the United States as well. So that's also in terms of the broader comparative context.
That's really interesting. Also, we'll probably ask Eliza, once we have her online, what is in fact happening on the streets of Poland and what are the political or social consequences. Because we know that the protesters are already not only protesting for women's rights, which are itself a very important aspect of the process, but they also make political postulates. So there is some political activism waking up or awakening in Poland. And of course, I think it has, of course, international consequences. I think the political consequences of these acts are there are similar mechanisms all over the world, and we can see what is happening in Poland is also has its consequence. Well, the same mechanism happens in all populist countries, including the US, as we can currently say that it. So I would like, Paula, maybe also to ask you if you could say a little bit more about the European perspective. So we know that Poland has been subject of the proceedings in the EU in relation to the rule of law, and how these protests or how the current political situation in Poland affects the where we are in the European Union.
Yes, so that's definitely kind of the broader context of kind of Polish relationship with international organizations with kind of global governance structures here. And I think if you allow, because I think there are basically two kind of important European organizations for this matter in particular. One is the European Union, and another, I see a question from Johanna in the chat, is the European Convention on Human Rights, so basically the Council of Europe. So we have on the one hand the Council of Europe, which is a bigger European organization, including Turkey, Russia, Azerbaijan, that is particularly devoted to issues concerning democracy, fundamental rights, and that's the organization that hosts the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. And that's a court that can decide on individual claims regarding human rights violations, regarding violations of the European Convention on Human Rights. And this court has in the past decided about abortion, and especially with regard to abortion rights in Poland. But this court has never decided that there is an obligation for a member state to introduce abortion rights. It rather has decided about how those countries implement the rights that they have already. So basically what if Poland beforehand in the previous law in Poland that is called the abortion compromise, I think even that is highly disputed nowadays, whether we should call it a compromise, because it gives it a certain legitimacy, because it was actually a very extreme compromise in the sense that it was already super restrictive abortion law that only allowed abortion in 3 cases, basically if it's a result of rape, if it's a result of a criminal act, the pregnancy, if it's a serious danger to the health of the mother or serious danger to the health of the child. And in those settings, even in practice, it has been very difficult to obtain a legal abortion in Poland, even if one of these cases has been confirmed in a way. So, and this is where the European Court of Human Rights has intervened in the past to say, like, if you have these laws allowing for an abortion, if a pregnancy is a result of rape, you have to at least enforce them in a way. So, and this is, there were judgments regarding Mrs. Tysiąc, or a more recent case in 2012 was PNS versus Poland, which was a case of a teenage pregnant girl that indeed had the prosecutor confirming that it was the pregnancy was a result of an illegal act, and that still had a lot of trouble to get access to a legal abortion. In the end, she was transported across the whole country in the middle of the night by some black limousine to get an abortion 800 kilometers away from her hometown without her parents present and things like this. So in this setting, the European Court of Human Rights went actually very far and said that Poland violated not only her right to family life, but and right to privacy, but also her right to be free from torture and inhuman and degrading treatment. So that was the first time ever that the court in such a case regarding reproductive rights used Article 3 of the European Convention, which basically says that countries should not torture or subject people to inhuman and degrading treatment. And the court said that what this little teenage girl went through amounted to such inhuman and degrading treatment. So this is one context where I guess there might be consequences. In practical terms, one has to also say, though, that before filing a case to the European Court of Human Rights, individuals have to what is called exhaust national remedies. So they have to go through all of the instances at the national level before they apply to the court in Strasbourg, which, that's why I'm saying practically here takes ages. So this is something that would not intervene fast in the debate, but there would have to be actual cases of also damage happening. And also then a case that would be admissible to go to the court in Strasbourg. So that is not something that is likely to happen fast. On the other hand, I do think that what we can read from the case law of the court in Strasbourg is that a total abortion ban might be contrary to the European Convention on Human Rights. This is something that the court has never said expressly, I emphasize, but but from what it has expressed more obiter dictum, the reasoning that because it never had to decide this question, I would say that it's not unlikely that such a more restrictive ban would be contrary here. And if I can you still hear me?
Paula, so thank you very much for that. I'm sorry you cut off, so I don't know if you are responding to a chat, or I just would like to follow up with the question. What about the discussion on the rule of law? So what if, of course, the Council, we can wait for the reactions from European courts, of course, it will take time until there can be any follow-up, of course. However, what about the formal aspects of the independence and impartiality of courts in Poland, and whether this discussion that is happening now can fall within the current discussion on independence and impartiality of judiciary in Poland generally, that is now subject to the proceedings in the EU?
Definitely. So I would say that from the EU side, there are basically two threats, two kind of major threats that Poland could be kind of facing. And I think that the recent developments and this particular judgment from the 22nd of October can contribute to those threats. One is to go to the extreme in a way. One is suspension of voting rights as a member state of the European Union. It's at the moment of interruption, but I think I should be now connected again. So in terms of the threats, one is the suspension of voting rights of Poland, which is possible according to Article 7 of the Treaty on the European Union. It obviously, in this extreme case, it requires unanimity of all other member states voting for this in the Council, which is also under current political circumstances unlikely. However, the way that Poland-EU relations have been developing, it's definitely, it has been escalating, and in that sense, the Law and Justice government has also been behaving differently to the Hungarian government, which is still affiliated with a major political party in the European Parliament and has been always, in a way, trying to implement judgments of the Court of Justice, whereas the Polish government is lately escalating the situation a little bit and is kind of losing its political allies. This would be a political measure, indeed, to suspend voting rights of Poland. This would be decided by the Council, so the representatives of all other member states in the European Union. So basically 26 out of 27 member states, because without Poland, would have to vote for this. The other threat, the second threat that Poland is facing with regard to the European Union is that is the stop of the flow of funds from the European Union. Currently, we are at a stage where the Council and the Parliament, so the two kind of legislative organs of the European Union, have basically agreed on a text of a new rule about introducing conditionality for EU structural funds, meaning that if member states do not fulfill certain rule of law requirements, structural funds of the EU can be stopped. And for that, only qualified majority voting in the Council is needed, so we don't have this kind of unanimity situation where Viktor Orban could protect the Polish government. So those are a bit the two kind of concrete threats, which are still maybe not as immediate, but...
Thank you very much. I think that the government wasn't actually expecting what is happening together with this judgment. I think everybody seems to be also surprised. So we will see, of course, what happens next and whether any further action from the EU will take place. I would like to now, Paula, let you rest for a moment, and we will have another panelist who is on the line. I hope that Eliza Rutynowska can hear us. Eliza, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We're very happy. to be able to connect through the phone. So let me again introduce Eliza to all of you. Eliza is a lawyer at the Civil Development Forum, in Poland, and she's actually very close with the demonstrators. She knows what is happening. She's now based in Poland, and she will tell us a little bit more what in fact is happening there. So Eliza, could we start by a short summary of what is happening on the streets of Poland, and how are the rights of protesters observed or not?
First of all, let me say what a pleasure it is to be with all of you here today, even if just via phone. But you know, these are circumstances that we have to deal with. Yes, what is happening on the streets today? Well, we are amidst a very peaceful and a very feminine revolution. I believe it's something that has been staring up in many people over the past years. Of course, today we're going to be focusing on the issue of the abortion ban, but you must keep in mind that a lot of the protesters are actually calling for the dismissal of the entire government, not only because of the of this one situation with the abortion ban, but because of years and years of curbing and actually limiting citizens' freedoms and our rights as people. So that's just a short intro. So actually, we've been witnessing protests on the streets for a while now. Back in August, protesters took to the streets because of the way LGBTI activists were treated in an appalling manner. And that's when a rainbow team of defenders, of human rights defenders, of attorneys and trainee attorneys like myself have decided to rally together and create a group which is right now based on one phone number that all the protesters can just write on their arms and call us whenever they get stopped or detained by the police. And that's how we work. So we're basically this kind of 24/7 call-in lawyer for all the protesters. This started in Warsaw, seeing as the protests from August happened here, but currently, because of the countrywide phenomenon of the abortion ban protests, a lot of our cities have these types of numbers that you can call and receive pro bono legal aid. So that's just the technical part of the issue. There are about 70 lawyers right now working on this issue in Warsaw alone. That kind of gives you the idea of the scale that we are dealing with. Last Friday, we were talking about around 400,000 people out on the streets, and those are the official statistics from the police department. And we know that they're always, right now, they're always, downgraded. So we're thinking that around 800,000 people could have easily taken to the streets of bigger cities and smaller ones as well. When the protests erupted after the abortion ban ruling went through, they were a lot less friendly than they are now. They were really an expression of complete and utter disbelief of everyone involved. We were all of us human rights defenders were sure, and the lawyers as well, we were sure that this ruling would not go through, that they would, push it back, and kind of keep it in the freezer as the sort of, threat to actually have over the heads of Polish women, so that they would know that, something like that could happen if they were not going to cooperate with the government. Instead, what happened was the government decided to take the leap and actually, start their autumn or fall offensive lines, as we call it here. Why am I talking about the government in the context of the Constitutional Tribunal. Shouldn't, courts be independent? Of course they should be independent. And that is why we, all the Polish lawyers involved in the rule of law fight do not agree with calling the current Constitutional Tribunal a constitutional tribunal. So we always use the word sham or, misplaced or quasi constitutional tribunal because of the nature of how it was created. So three of the judges that are currently sitting in the tribunal are actually the so-called double judges. They were elected as doubles to places that should have been taken by others, but they were chosen instead because they were more cooperative with the current ruling party. You must also know, and I'm sure that this has been mentioned, that the doublers took part in actually giving out this ruling. So that's the first formal argument that we have, that it's not really a ruling, it's not really a binding judgment. And the second argument that we have, and we are pushing through as Polish lawyers, is the fact that one of the judges who ruled on this issue was actually was formerly an MP who signed the motion which actually initiated the entire proceeding. So basically, we have a judge ruling in her own favor. So these are the two major formal issues we have with the ruling. Not even getting into the entire, merit of the judgment. So we also call it the quasi judgment. However, that being said, with the current political climate, we cannot hope for the politicians to actually do anything about the Constitutional Tribunal, which is right now a political force. Instead, what we are hoping for is that courts themselves, common courts, that are entitled to rule on the basis of the Constitution itself and legal acts themselves, and actually follow through with their own judgment over specific cases, to not comply with this quasi-ruling. So there's this big movement to actually empower courts to do that. And but back to the streets. So after this ruling was pushed through, a lot of people took to the streets, not only women, men as well. But the thing is, it wasn't only about the abortion. The thing is that those people know how this quasi-constitutional tribunal works. So the main, motion that is being pushed for by the protesters is the entire dismissal of this government. The Constitutional Tribunal cannot be continued to be used as a political force, as it is being used today. The protesters took to the streets, and then from the Constitutional Tribunal, they decided to walk towards the private home of one of the chief of the ruling party, Jarosław Kaczyński. So once they arrived there were a multitude of police forces deployed all around the street where he lived. Tear gas was used against protesters. We firmly stand with the fact that it was used disproportionately. A lot of the policemen have abused their powers, and therefore there was need for us as lawyers to react. Over the next couple of days, multiple meetings took place, multiple gatherings took place with the police forces, always, calling on them to go home, saying that it's illegal to hold these spontaneous gatherings, which is a lie. I'm not afraid to call it a lie. For the past couple of months, we have been operating as a country under the so-called state of epidemic. However, the government has abused their power in the sense that they had used a lot of state of emergency laws and actually mirrored them in the current legislation. For example, saying that it's illegal to gather over 5 people on the streets, and therefore, spontaneous gatherings are also prohibited. That's not true. You can only, under Polish law, that can only be prohibited under a specific state of emergency, which has not been declared. So, we're not only fighting for the rights of protesters, but we're also combating the entire legislation that we are right now kind of operating under. So that's also an additional difficulty.
Aliza, excuse me if I may just interrupt. It's all absolutely interesting. I would just like to maybe pause on COVID-19 pandemic restrictions. So you are saying that it is not illegal for the demonstrators to gather spontaneously now in Poland, even regardless the current measures?
Yes, yes, it's not, because, we always call on the protesters to, first of all, have their, reasonable hat on and, keep their masks on and keep social distance as well, because that can actually be a pretext to, give them a fine for not following hygienic, measures. But gatherings, as understood under the European Convention of Human Rights and the right to express your opinion and, to protest, and the right to protest it's not prohibited. That can only happen under the state of emergency, which has not been declared. And that's the same thing with a lot of different restrictions that we have been seeing in Poland today. So the same goes for masks. It's only good reason that people are wearing them. The legislation has not been administered properly. It has not been, we don't have the right legal basis for everyone to wear masks, and the government is not listening to lawyers. And right now, we are operating under decrees which are being, announced every Friday, basically, and then, calling for people to, for example, to dismantle once they gather to protest. So the right to protest has not been prohibited. So that has to be mentioned, and that's what we're also using as our argument. Of course, the government is right now fighting back by saying that organizers of these events can be actually persecuted for causing danger to the mass public. However, again, we're operating on different levels. These gatherings are usually, most 99%, they're so-called spontaneous gatherings. These types of gatherings, they don't have organizers. So really, what the government is right now doing, or actually administers the prosecutor's office, the public prosecutor's office, is to do, is to find people who can be considered organizers of these events. That actually happened to a 14-year-old girl in THUAS, a small town in Warsaw. So actually what happened was she went out to protest with her grandmother, and she was shouting something, and then one of the policemen actually went up to her and started threatening her, saying that she organized this event, that she had to give him her name, etc. And then she started asking people to leave because she was so scared. And that was enough for the policeman to actually consider her an organizer of the event. These types of actions are absolutely appalling. We have also had notes coming in from people all over the country saying that police forces are actually coming to their houses and actually saying that, and threatening them, saying that, you can't organize these under the state of the epidemic. You can't, well, of course you can't organize a spontaneous gathering. It's kind of the sense of a spontaneous gathering that it doesn't have an organizer, legally speaking. So we do know of a official letter that was sent out to all around the country, actually calling for these people to be prosecuted. We do have the Vice Minister of Justice actually mirroring that statement in his public appearances. We do have the Prime Minister actually accusing the protesters of
the sudden rise in COVID-19 cases. Of course, we still don't know where he gets this data from. So, we're worried that, he's just spreading misinformation. And then, of course, we do have the Minister of Education threatening students and threatening headmasters of schools and teachers themselves that if they urge the kids to engage in the protests, they are actually, there are going to be consequences towards these people. There have been instances of children getting limiting access to online learning for kids who decided to put the symbol of the women's strike on their profile pictures. There has been an instance at the University of Warsaw of one of the professors who actually sent out an email to all of his students saying that no notion of the women's strike will be tolerated, and there will be disciplinary proceedings launched against those who openly, express their feelings about the current situation. It must be mentioned here that that professor is also actually a member of the disciplinary chamber of the Supreme Court, which is also a sham tribunal that is absolutely an unconstitutional body. So going back to the protesters themselves, luckily we had fewer instances of police brutality than we did back in August, and fewer arrests as well. However, there have been instances of arrests, mostly young people, mostly activists. And basically what we're doing now, along with the Warsaw Bar Association, is also launching these trainings, these online trainings. I'm actually joining you right now from after following through one of these trainings for high school students, so that they know what their rights are. So that's basically the state of play now. We are amidst not only these protests, but right now we have all of our cases from August also coming in. So it's going to be a very hectic, some very hectic winter months are ahead.
Thank you very much, Elisa. It's I hope you stay safe and keep up with the great work. I think it's very important to realize citizens what their rights are, and especially youth and students. So on that note, I would like to ask you a question and then maybe move to Hannah in case of other questions, because I can see a question also from Paula, whether you think that this current wave of protests represents the support of majority of society for liberal values, because we know that the public support of the protest is quite high, and there is how can you, what is your analysis of that? Are people supporting women? Are there women's rights? Are they supporting their political postulates? Or are they just fighting for freedom in general from oppression in the current situation in Poland?
Thank you so much for this question. I think it's crucial to ask in times of like these. I strongly believe that people right now took to the streets, after hearing that ruling, due to the fact that, there was a massive support system for the Black protests back in 2016 when this idea was first raised. And that's when we managed to fight back effectively. This time we lost, and I feel that people had two reasons. First of all, they are absolutely against, this ruling, which is appalling on so many levels. And then because of the fact of how the tribunal actually was used as a political tool, and people are just tired of this constant, destruction of rule of law, and this constant and very, consequent destruction of our democracy. So I believe that they took to the streets because of their will to fight for freedom, to actually regain their, their own rights as citizens.
Yes, it's very interesting also to see, and it's quite refreshing, given that in the current elections, the majority voted for the current president, who in fact represents completely opposite values. So, and we see this trend not only in Poland or Europe, but as also Paula mentioned, we can see this also in the United States, that in fact the public supports populist leaders. So I think it's very refreshing to see this protests in Poland and around the world, and the international community support, if we may say so, of what is happening, especially in the current, in view of the current political events in Poland, but also internationally. Okay, Eliza, I think I will now give the floor to Hannah to ask if there are any other questions to you. And I would like to, through this medium, already connect with Marta and let her know that I will be calling her next. So Marta, please get ready for a phone call. And now, Hannah, if there are still some questions for Eliza, please let us know.
Yes, hello. I have one question that I received myself from some of my international friends, whether it is possible to support the protest and the movement and just the Polish women from abroad, not only Polish nationality people, but just anyone who's concerned about what's going on. Like, what ways would you advise to promote, to support the ones who are protesting in Poland?
Thank you so much for this question. And let me just send out my warmest wishes to the person who asked that. So the thing is that right now what they're also doing is curbing our platforms of speaking out. So really, the international community can make sure that our voice is being heard, and not only of, you know, of members of parliament or members of the opposition, but also of the protesters themselves, and of everyone who is fighting with you know, curbing of civil rights. I do know that a lot of governments have already decided to offer help to Polish women to make sure that they can legally access abortion and safe abortion abroad, which is also a major, it's really just creating a safe haven for the persecuted women, and just to also make sure that it's not only the women who have the means that can travel abroad that will be able to access these services, but also those who will be hit the hardest by this quasi ruling, and those are the poorest of our society. And actually helping them with access not only to abortion but also to just overall health measures. What we do know is that there are also difficulties with accessing prenatal care, because I mean, it's what's the point of diagnosing a fetus if even though it will be deformed, there is no way around it. So we are actually apprehensive towards what can actually happen there. So that's the way, and also all the protests that we have seen around the Europe and around the world have been a major motivation for us to keep on fighting.
Yes, if I can add to that, there is one protest which will be organized in The Hague this Sunday. I shared the link in the Q&A, so maybe someone who's here is interested to joining.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you, Eliza. I also want to let you know, Eliza, that we are also in touch with the Polish community in The Hague, indeed, and in the Netherlands, and there are plans for many more protests, and there is a lot of support of the cause. We are already planning another event where we will be also connecting with those who organize protests in the Netherlands and in The Hague to hear their opinion, point of view, and how supportive the Dutch society is of the current events in Poland. So, Hannah, are there any other questions to Eliza? If not, I think I have a question to Sorry, thank you very much, Hannah. If not, I think I have to do some undertake some technical operations, so connect with Marta. So thank you very much, Eliza. Please take care of yourself and others, and thank you very much once again for taking part in our discussion.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. So in the meantime, maybe I could ask Paula also a question, because you also formulated this question about liberal values. So what is your opinion about the current situation? And because it's not, the protest is not anymore about women's rights only, but it's about liberal values in general. So could you tell us more what you think is happening now in Poland? Can we speak about the revolution, societal revolution?
I mean,
I know, but maybe you could give us your opinion.
So indeed, am I also live now? So like I indeed do not feel like an expert here because I am currently in Amsterdam and not in Poland on this. Like the question like resulted from other debates when I have heard this issue being raised, that there is some kind of paradigm shift when it comes to liberal values, and like it was triggered quite a bit by Agnieszka's comment as well about the illiberal constitutionalism, because I think that in that sense we really have an open debate here that I'm not sure can be only decided by like some 52% majority kind of in a purely mathematical sense. And so for me here, like one of the key kind of liberal ideas is also a sense of equality and individual rights. That's why these human rights issues come up then. So it's I do think that illiberal constitutionalism comes with an idea of some kind of two class of citizens that is justified in this setting then, yes? So this is, I would indeed, this is again just to start the discussion on this, like I would indeed say that that we do see a broad support kind of for liberal values, and that's something that we do see those protests kind of escalating. Also, Eva has mentioned the LGBT issues. That's something that indeed also now from the EU perspective, EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in her State of the Union speech, in her yearly address to the European Parliament in terms of policy priorities, mentioned that the LGBT-free zones in Poland are against the Charter of Fundamental Rights and EU values. So if we see those issues as connected, I do see that we see a certain paradigm shift and kind of emergence of kind of majorities in favor of those liberal values. But
Thank you very much, Paula. Unfortunately, I cannot get connect with Marta, so I think we should now focus more on wrapping up and answering questions. So Hannah, the floor is back to you. If there are any questions that are unanswered, please let us know. If not, we will go on with our discussion.
Yes, there is one more question that I see was already answered by Ms. Paula and Ms. Eva, considering the position of Ms. Pawłowicz, who was the judge in Constitutional Tribunal Court. And the issue is that beforehand she signed the motion to the Constitutional Court that was refused, but considered the same issue. Then she became the judge, and then she judged on the same issue. So there is a bit of wondering whether she will be whether she's the appropriate person to judge on this matter. But I think it's still up to the discussion. And from the questions, I think we do not have anything.
Could I
more.
add the question?
Just Miss Marta just texted that we can try to connect with her now.
So as you connect with Marta, I also wanted to ask maybe to the colleagues that know more about the Polish context about any possible strategies behind not publishing the reasoning of the Constitutional Court and not publishing the judgment itself, what we mentioned, whether there is any kind of more rational way of explaining this?
If I could say something, I don't think so that it is a rational thing, but as I said, well, from this perspective of illiberal constitutionalism, it is understood because this is political decision not to publish this judgment. I think that Peace Party wanted to have law. They opted about this law, but they don't wanted to engage in the discussion in the parliament. So they activated the Constitutional Tribunal, and it seemed that it would be easy, yeah. But eventually, in my opinion, they didn't expect this protest and the activation of such a mass people to the streets. So now they are trying to bake off. Yes, they are trying to do something to resolve this problem. And for them, because it is not the precedent, we had this precedent, yes, before, with not publishing the judgment. And now we see the same technique, yeah. So we don't know what will be the result, the final result. And I don't know also, but I think that it's definitely, in my opinion, the future will not be liberal as long as peace has majority, let's say.
I cannot, thank you very much, Agnieszka, thank you, Paula. I cannot get in contact with Marta, unfortunately, so hopefully Marta can join our next discussion, which is already planned, and give us her own perspective from the perspective of international law and international human rights law. So I think we can start wrapping up this discussion by, and I would like to do this by asking you maybe an open question, what should happen next? So when we don't know exactly what will happen, because we have many questions, what are your opinions? What should happen in Poland? Who should, and it's a very general question from a political perspective, social perspective, or legal perspective. And the second question would be what we, lawyers, academics, students, researchers should do. So, Paula or Agnieszka, please feel free to start.
Okay, then I can start. Maybe I do not have a simple answer as to what should happen next. That's actually, I guess, one of the most challenging questions. So I do think that this movement is something impressive in terms of civil society and social movements in Poland. So in that sense, I do hope that they manage to keep up the kind of broad support and the activism for this. From the EU perspective, from the European Union perspective that I mostly study, I would kind of hope that the EU comes up with some more kind of principled way of dealing with democratic values overall, and democratic values inside of the European Union and in the member states. So with regard to EU institutions themselves observing democratic values and rule of law, with regard to member states observing this, because I think that this is crucial also for the future of European integration. We are currently in a situation when we have a lot of opportunistic political ad hoc decisions on this, and not a more kind of principled approach. And I do think that we see this in particular with the abortion situation also transnationally, that it's obviously a social issue and a political issue that probably where lawyers or judges are not the best place institutions to provide a solution actually for this. But nonetheless, the legal structures determine also the channels of activism and also of strategic litigation there. So I do think that the legal framework matters a lot nonetheless here, and I would kind of hope that we maybe also do get some more of kind of political parties in Poland on board to kind of reflect also the calls of this protest, which is also currently has been lacking. And I think in terms of the role of the academics is really also to trying to map this kind of institutional legal paths towards some kind of social change. And so this is a bit the review first.
Thank you very much, Paula. Agnieszka, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, indeed, it is a very difficult question, and obviously my answer will be, I don't know, not complex, but I see that I see some ground, as you said. We have a legal ground, and here I think that law or constitutional law is very limited in the possibilities to deal with constitutional changes or systemic changes that we observe now, and also this abortion question, because abortion is not a legal thing, in my opinion. It is more ethical and moral question. So we should deal with that in other ways, like only using these legal tools. For me, education is the most important thing, but not only schools should be responsible for that, but also parents, home, our whole environment. And I see it because I have 2 children, 2 boys that they support the protest well, spontaneously and with great happiness. Yes, they are really involved in that. I see also this space for academics, for us to explain what is going on, what should happen, and how we should react, how we should understand things. Because in my opinion, the most problematic thing for our society, for Polish society, is that we, or schools, are not deal with open-mindedness. Yes, pupils at schools are not trained to be open-minded and to say everything what is in their hearts and how they feel about the situation. There is no discussion, as I know, because I have, as I said, two sons in schools. And I see also the political, political floral space to resolve these problems, but I am not sure, or maybe we should distinguish political and partisan, because political is what belongs to polity as a society. And here we have really a lot of things to say. But when we look at our parliament, our Sejm, yes, we see that there is a lot of party interest. And almost every party in Polish Sejm is conservative. So this is a real problem, yes, because we don't know how to address those liberal things, yes, how to deal with the value which is individual. We see something else. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Agnieszka. Definitely some systemic change is needed on many fronts, and I think there is a lot for politicians also to work on with different social laws supporting mothers and disabled children and many other grounds. I have good news. We have Marta Achler on the line. We are already wrapping up, but I think that Marta, I would like to ask you a question on if you could just give us your expert opinion on the current protests in Poland from the international law perspective, and I leave it very general so that you can perhaps decide yourself what you would like to say on what is now happening and how international law responds to that. And I also would like to ask you maybe more from an innovative perspective, what about online protests and the use of technology? Because I know you also wanted to mention this, and I think that's also something for all of us to consider and take into account. So I would like to ask you, Marta, if you could mute the discussion, because I can hear the echo, and then you are already on the speaker, and then I will give you the floor. Thank you very much.
Well, so good afternoon, Barbara and everyone. I'm so sorry for the technical difficulties of joining with you, and I'm sorry especially to have missed all of the presenters, or at least some of the presenters that went before me, because the discussions and the protests continue, and I'm following them quite diligently, and looking at them also from a point of view of international law. Currently, I'm with the ECNL, and you asked about online assemblies. Well, I just finished my PhD on assemblies and associations online, and I have prepared a presentation for everybody to see in case you are able to put it up. I would like to say is that in the case of freedom of assembly and the protests in Poland, it raises a number of interesting issues in terms of international standards, which I think are extremely robust. Treaty law as applicable of the protests for those, including.
Marta, I'm afraid the connection is not the best. It can be myself, but we do not hear you. Maybe you could move a little bit.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Let me try. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay, I will try to speak with you. Is the connection better now?
Yes, it is perfect.
Okay. So the protests in Poland, from an international point of view, have raised, I think, a number of interesting issues. One is the freedom of expression and the use of strong language. And that has been an issue of discussion, I guess, among some politicians and people commenting on the protests in Poland, because some of the mottos that are being used by the protesters have been considered as very strong language. The other one is it's raised the issue of counter-demonstration, which is also covered by international law. Also, spontaneous assemblies is an issue which has come up because international law does and wants to protect assemblies that are a reaction to a certain political event that is not able to be dealt with by people through notification to authorities earlier. It's not a regular assembly, it's one that happens as a result of a particular event. The next point I wanted to raise is that it has also in international law, the question of assemblies and the use of force by law enforcement has also come up in the context of the protests that are taking place in Poland now. Also, possibly this has been raised before my intervention here, and that is protests which are taking place in the times of COVID and a pandemic are also an interesting question, and whether or not such protests can be restricted as a result of the pandemic. And finally, the question that you asked, Barbara, and that's the one about online protests. So that's the few points that I would like to cover. And starting from freedom of expression and use of strong language, which is, I'm not sure if you have the slide up because I don't have you on the screen right now, but it's the fundamental component of freedom of assembly is actually expression. And international law says that, in fact, you cannot restrict the way in which an assembly expresses itself to the words that are used, because it's not just information and ideas that should be passed through an assembly. It's also things that offend, shock and disturb the state or any sector of the population. And that we can find in case law of the European Court of Human Rights. And so protesters in Poland have every right to convey their message in strong language. Whether or not that shocks or disturbs other people is not a question that is a problem for the law. Meanwhile, the law does draw a line when any language or expression incites to violence. That is where the line is drawn in terms of international law and protest messages. So the next point I wanted to mention is that spontaneous assemblies and counter demonstrations. These are clearly, both of them, protected by international law. Therefore, fortunately, unfortunately, the main protests should go ahead, and peaceful assemblies are often organized in a spontaneous manner. So there is no chance to agree with law enforcement and make preparations, because it's a response basically to an event that has just happened, and there's no time to notify. In fact, international law doesn't require notification. It is just a facilitatory tool to make sure that protests go ahead peacefully and are protected by the law enforcement. In terms of counter demonstrations, which perhaps you have also touched upon, whereby persons who do not agree with the main protest go out, they are also protected by the freedom of assembly right under international law. And that indeed is something that is protected in its own right, while the police and law enforcement need to ensure that they prevent undue disruption to the main assembly, which they are opposing. So there is a very complicated yet doable task for the law enforcement to make sure basically that these assemblies can see each other and be within sight and sound, but not disturb one or the other. In general, I think what has been mentioned already, which part of the conversation which I caught, was that there has been some show and some use of force by police in Poland during these protests. And the recent UN document on less lethal weapons in law enforcement addresses assemblies in particular when it comes to the use of force and use of certain weapons such as projectile bullets, rubber bullets, tear gas, etc., in order to contain or disperse protest. And here, international law is very clear that use of force is absolutely the last resort that should be used by police, and that states are obliged to de-escalate the violence as far as possible to minimize the risk of violence, and they should always be wary of the fact that heavy displays of any kind of less lethal weapons may actually do the opposite, so escalate the tensions during assemblies instead of de-escalate the tensions. Therefore, the go-to motto is that do not use violence, or do not use force, unless there is an imminent threat to public order of extreme violence. And I think there is also a very deep understanding now on both the UN level but also the Council of Europe level that any weapon used by the police can be lethal if used in a certain way. So even tear gas can cause permanent damage or permanent harm, or such as taser guns and other equipment. online protest, just to wrap it up and bring it back to your question, Barbara, and that is most recently, and ECNL has been very involved in the drafting and adoption of General Comment number 37 by the Human Rights Committee. Now, this comment has been in the making for a very long time because it is an interpretative document of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, and that is in particular Article 21 on freedom of assembly. And their discussions were lengthy and very drawn out to arrive at a conclusion whether or not you can actually take or have an assembly online or wholly or partially. So we know that online platforms and means are used to mobilize people, to facilitate assemblies, to gather participants that eventually go out into the streets. We know also from protests in Spain and in other countries that new technologies such as applications which may guide protesters where there is violence, where they should go, are being used. So these are the new technologies that are being used in order to facilitate the protest by organisers and sometimes by authorities as well. However, there was always the question around whether or not you can protest only online. And here there is an example actually from the current protest which I received as one of the people interested, both legally but also somehow politically and emotionally in what is happening in Poland, is that there was a call for basically writing to MPs and the Constitutional Tribunal in very, very large numbers in order to sort of flood these institutions with protest messages. Now, this general comment, the UN in 2020, so just earlier this year, has absolutely has recognized that assemblies can happen outdoors, indoors, but also online, and that new technologies offer the opportunity to assemble either wholly, but also partly online, and play an integral role in organizing and participating and monitoring physical gatherings, and that indeed the state has an obligation not to interfere with such communications and therefore impede the right of assembly. So this has been largely recognized. Now, my final point that I wanted to make perhaps is the one, and I'm not sure, please stop me if you have already discussed this, and that's the one of coronavirus and protest. And now we know that freedom of assembly is not an absolute right, which means that there are some limitations that are permissible under the law. It's an exhaustive and limited set of limitations. However, public health and safety is one of them. However, in view of the fact that there has been many protests, not just in Poland, throughout the pandemic, the UN Special Rapporteur, Mr. Clement Volet, has already said that indeed a pandemic does not need to halt freedoms of assembly and association. You can have an assembly, as has been done in Poland, with masks, with some social distancing if possible, and in order to keep the safety and to not bar assemblies from happening simply because there is a health concern. So ECNL has also come up with some tools and resources that might be interesting for participants to this meeting of what states must not do in order to preserve a healthy civic space even during a pandemic. And if you go to the website, you can find tools and information about how international law can work in favor of both maintaining health and safety, but also allowing for assemblies to go ahead, as has actually been the case in Poland. So that pretty much sums up what I wanted to say in terms of international law. Another interesting point that maybe people have noted in Poland, which I didn't include in my presentation, was the fact that we have seen that some police have also joined the protest. And that's another interesting question for international law, where the neutrality of police must be maintained, but on the other hand, they too have the right to assemble. So there's an interesting conundrum there under international law, which can be discussed. And that would be all from me. If you would like to open the floor for questions and answers, I'd be happy also to hear them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marta, for this very informative presentation. It's really very useful to know. I'm looking at Hannah to see if we have any questions from the chat, but we can also open up a discussion this time. Wrapping up discussion for real,
yes,
in response to your presentation too. So from other speakers, if there is anything to add or comment on what Marta said, feel free to do so.
I have a question not from chat but from myself, whether you think that online protests are same effective as the protest in person. I don't know if they are as visible for the powers from government as protests on the streets.
Marta, did you hear?
Yes, I heard the question. Thank you for the question, and that's something that has come up in discussion. It's extremely on point. It's difficult to say how effective the protest, simply an online protest, is, right? But you know, for lack of better options, if it does happen only online, that still should be protected. So the question really under international law isn't, does it work? Will it work? The question is that if somebody wants to do it, should they be protected under the law and should they have recourse? And the answer is always yes. But whether or not it works, I think it really depends. Now, there is a case from 2012 in Germany, where there were people protesting by sending, like they were calling for sending in emails and flooding the authorities and the Constitutional Court in Poland. This was a case of Lufthansa who were involved in returning migrants for the government back to their home countries. Now, people were not very happy with that, so they decided to, let's say, email bomb Lufthansa and flood its services for tickets, for buying tickets, right, for a number of hours. And the court, for other reasons, found that there was nothing wrong with that, and that was a legitimate form of protest, which in fact cost the company some money, so it wasn't insignificant. So I think it doesn't have the same effect, perhaps, as, you know, 100,000 people on the street like we saw in Warsaw or in last week. But still, I think it does have economic implications. It has implications on the rights of others to access information, which is a duty of the state to provide it. So I think it does have an impact, but probably not the same and cannot be measured in the same way as a real-life street protest.
Thank you very much, Marta. Hannah or other speakers, would you like to add anything? Paula.
So just very briefly on kind of 2 points, I guess we are in this debate rather kind of opening up a lot of paths of what can be discussed and analyzed. So it's not in a conclusive manner, but just to flag issues. So two more issues that about the strong language, that there are also social psychologists such as Michael Billig who talk about the role of ridicule and humor in the society, kind of, and also in making certain things like basically reaching the mainstream if there is the ridicule on the humor aspect. So that's also kind of one way of seeing the bold language and the creativity of the protest banners and the things. So and also on the online dimension, I guess it doesn't fully overlap, but there is also the issue of like participation of the younger generation, that there are a lot of there's a lot of talk about the jadders, so like about the boomers, I guess would be the English equivalent here. So the rejection in a way of the ways that the older generation does things. And there is a lot of activism from Polish activists below 20, yes, which is something that also in terms of even election participation has not been high of this group. So there seems to be also a different social mobilization that is probably connected to the online platforms, definitely. And this is just to flag more issues.
Yeah, I mean,
Absolutely.
no,
Thank
I
you,
would.
Paula.
I would.
Sorry. Go on, Marta,
sorry.
please.
Yeah, I just wanted to reconfirm that you know, I mean, the recognition, at least in international law and all the discussions that have taken place around this, you know, there was a lot of question marks whether or not it's really something that happens online and can be protected by international law. But it's just that, as has just been said, you know, I mean, it has motivated or activated different parts of society that perhaps the street might not. So people who don't want to go out because they're worried about the pandemic, or because they're sick, or because they're working, or because they're overseas like me, can join, you know, can join the protest in a different way and have some kind of impact on what is happening. So I think that, yeah, it's not to be excluded that this is a new way of you know, joining, and it's a new way of participation that perhaps mobilizes more people than would an ordinary demonstration that goes to the street, because you basically have to be there. And also with regards to the foul language, yes, I mean, the benchmark in international law is quite low, so you can really, you should be able to express yourself in any way possible, as long as it doesn't call for violence and incite to violence or violent acts against others. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Marta. I now would like to wrap up the whole discussion. And first, let me start by thanking all participants and speakers, foremostly, for their interventions, their opinions. And we have faced a number of technical challenges today. I think it was the most challenging panel for me to moderate. That being said, we went through this, and our discussion, although more improvised than originally planned, I think it was very interesting, and it opened up a lot of further topics for us to explore. So thank you again, all speakers, for sharing your views. And of course, all participants. And I would like to conclude by saying that the Center of Expertise Global Governance at the Hague University of Applied Sciences and the Lectorate Multilevel Regulation is very interested in bringing this discussion further, the discussion on the rule of law challenges and women's rights in Poland. I wrote down a few topics for potential discussion, but please remember that we are here for you students foremostly. So if you are interested in further discussions, if you would like to hear from other experts, if there is something that is particularly relevant for you and you don't understand it and you would like us to explain it to you, we are very happy to do so, and please feel free to email me. You can find my email address on the website of the Center of Expertise Global Governance, and we will also type it in here through the chat, and we will be very happy to organize another session, which is already coming up at the end of November with other speakers, especially to understand the Dutch perspective of the protests. And last but not least, I would like to thank very much Hanna Falkiewicz and Deborah Spinabelli for helping us out with the moderation and organization of this event. So, Marta, I'm disconnecting with you too, and
thank you very much.
Thank you again.
Thank you, and apologies for all the technical difficulties. I'm sorry that
we also apologize. That's what we face these days. So I wish everyone a very nice afternoon, and we hope to keep in touch. Thank you.